On Zombie Reddit, today's story is...
I revealed the truth about how my mother and stepdad abandoned me in the hospital so they could go on holiday. Now my dad is seeking full custody of me. My stepdad Kevin is an unbearable person. He is controlling, nosy, and never considers my feelings. My life changed completely when he married my mother. I will tell you how I got into this situation. It all started 3 years ago when my parents separated. Their divorce didn't surprise me, as they always had problems. They were never really compatible and there was constant tension between them, especially about the housework. My mother, although she stayed at home, never showed any interest in domestic responsibilities. She didn't like cooking, cleaning, or helping me with my studies. Instead, she would spend hours on her phone trying to become a beauty influencer, although she never managed to get many followers. When she wasn't glued to her cell phone, she would spend a large part of the money my father earned on outings with her friends, shopping, brunches, and beauty treatments. She was never what people consider a traditional mother. While other parents worry about their children's homework and take an interest in their day-to-day lives, my mother only cared about herself. She was obsessed with her appearance and constantly pressured me to stay slim and well-groomed. It was as if she saw me more as an extension of her image than as her daughter. After the divorce, my parents shared custody of me and I was split between their houses. I was just getting used to this new life when my mother met Kevin. She fell in love with him immediately. Within days they were an official couple, and a few weeks later she introduced him to me. Suddenly, this stranger was present in every moment of our lives, and I was expected to accept him without complaint. I wouldn't have minded accepting Kevin if he had been a good person, but he isn't. From the very beginning, he had unrealistic expectations. He wanted me to see him as my new father, which I thought was disrespectful to my real dad. He's always meddling in my life and finding ways to criticize me. No matter what I do, he always finds something wrong. For example, he has 2 children of his own and he gets visibly upset when I act in a way that he says is too feminine. He tells me directly not to wear dresses or tight skirts, as if he had the right to control how I dress. He also insists that I wear my hair in a bun all the time, without letting it down. His controlling behavior doesn't end there. When my friends come over, he constantly interrupts our gatherings saying he's just checking up, but it's not a simple quick stop by. He literally barges in and hangs around, as if he doesn't trust us to be alone. It's very invasive and it embarrasses me. When I ask him to leave us alone, he dismisses it by saying things like girls need constant supervision and that we should pretend he's not even here. The most frustrating thing is that he doesn't do the same with his children or feel the need to watch their every move. When I told my mother how much this bothers me, hoping she would understand and support me, she simply justified it by saying that Kevin is just being protective, as if that explained his behavior. To make matters worse, Kevin's children make my life impossible. They don't respect my personal space and our personalities clash completely. They keep harassing me either by making fun of me or finding new ways to make me feel inferior. They annoy me constantly, and instead of doing something about it, my mother says that that's how all siblings behave. When my mother decided to marry Kevin after only a year of dating, she expected me to simply adapt. She told me clearly that she loved him and was determined to make their marriage work. She knew I had doubts and frustrations, but she was very clear about what she wanted from me, to give Kevin a chance and not put up obstacles. She asked me to accept him as part of our family. It was a lot to ask, especially considering how fast everything was happening, but I wanted to support her and keep the peace, so I agreed to try. Since then, I have made a sincere effort to accept Kevin and his children. I've tried to follow his rules and adapt to the changes, although it hasn't been easy at all. One of the things that bothers me the most is that Kevin insists that I call him Dad. I don't feel comfortable doing it, and every time I say it, I feel resentment growing inside me. I already have a dad and I don't want to replace him, but Kevin doesn't seem to care or understand how difficult it is for me. But beyond the name, what really hurts is seeing how my mother's priorities have changed. After getting married, she seems more interested in Kevin's children than in me. She spends more time with them, helps them with things she never did for me, and acts more like a mother to them than she ever was to me. Sometimes I feel like I've lost my place in her life. She's only a mother to Kevin's children. I would love to live with my dad, especially because he understands me better, but he had to move to another city for a better paid job. Although he visits me when he can and we talk on the phone regularly, I spend most of my time with my mom. My dad knows about the problems I have with Kevin and his children because I have told him everything. He supports me completely and has even tried to talk to my mother about the situation. Although he wants to help, every time he mentions something, my mother shuts him down. She tells him to stay out of it and not to interfere in their marriage. Over the years, I have done my best to adapt to my new family. I have really tried to get along with Kevin and his children, hoping that if I was patient and kept an open mind, we could build a positive relationship, but despite my efforts, I still feel invisible in my own family. This year, Kevin received an unexpected promotion at work. When he got home, he proudly announced that he would be taking us all on a family trip. We were thrilled with the news, especially since it had been a long time since we had all gone on vacation together. He and Mom chose the destination and booked tickets and accommodation for everyone, but as often happens, the day before the trip, I was in a car accident with my mother. We were on our way home from shopping for clothes for the vacation when another car hit us from behind. It wasn't a terrible crash, but it was enough to destabilize us and cause us some injuries. My mother came out of it pretty well, with only a few scratches and bruises, but I wasn't so lucky. I broke my arm and suffered a concussion from the impact. They called an ambulance and before I knew it, I was admitted to the hospital. When Kevin found out about the accident, he came running to the hospital pretending to be concerned. At first I thought he really cared about our well-being, but it soon became clear that his real concern was the trip. He kept mentioning whether or not we could go, and he was distressed about the money he had spent. The doctors informed us that due to my concussion, I would have to stay in the hospital for several days under observation. They wanted to make sure I was well before discharging me, but traveling was definitely not an option for me. Kevin looked at me with frustration, as if it were my fault that I had had the accident and had wasted his money. As I had to stay in the hospital, my mother reluctantly offered to stay with me. It gave me hope to see that she chose to support me at such a difficult time. However, Kevin quickly intervened, arguing that as our tickets were already paid for, we were already losing money with me not going, and that it didn't make sense for my mother to also waste more money by staying. Then he turned to me and said that at my age, I should be able to stay in hospital by myself for a few days. He pointed out how safe the hospital was, with doctors and nurses available 24 hours a day, suggesting that I had nothing to worry about. Kevin later mentioned that he had arranged for a babysitter to stay with me at home when I was discharged. I told him that I didn't feel comfortable staying alone in the hospital or having a babysitter look after me at home. I begged my mother to stay with me. My mother tried to defend me, telling Kevin that it wasn't right to leave me alone in the hospital. She knew this wasn't right. However, Kevin kept insisting. He went on to say that my mother's presence wasn't necessary, and that being alone would mean sitting around doing nothing productive all day. He made it sound as if her company was useless, ignoring the emotional support she could give me. For him, not wasting the money on the vacation was more important than anything else. Clearly, he didn't see me as his real daughter, so he simply didn't care how I felt or what was happening to me. I tried to explain that at 15, I shouldn't be left alone in the hospital. I was scared and in pain, and the idea of going through all this without any family around was overwhelming. I suggested a compromise, saying that maybe Mom could call my dad to come and stay with me while she and Kevin went on their trip. Of course, it would take him time to get here since he lives in another city, but I was sure he would come quickly if he knew I was hospitalized. I thought that way they could continue with their trip while making sure I wasn't alone. But Kevin rejected the idea immediately. He ignored my concern, saying I was being silly and overreacting to minor injuries. He dismissed my suggestion of calling my dad, saying it would only make him worry unnecessarily. According to Kevin, there was no need to disrupt anyone's plans for something as insignificant as a concussion and a broken arm. Injuries that would heal perfectly well with a few days' rest in the hospital. In the end, Kevin's pressure worked. I looked at my mother hoping she would stand firm and insist on staying with me, but as always she gave in to him. Instead of fighting for what I needed, she agreed to leave. She stayed with me for just one night, which gave me some comfort. I clung to the hope that maybe after seeing how vulnerable I felt, he would realize that I needed her there. But the next day, Kevin showed up at the hospital to take her away, eager to go on his trip as planned, not caring how I was doing. After my mother left me alone at the hospital, I felt abandoned and betrayed. After just one day of being there on my own, I couldn't hold back the tears any longer. One of the nurses saw me crying and, realizing that I had no one around to look after me, kindly offered to call my mother. I told her it was okay, that they probably wouldn't answer anyway, but she insisted. So I gave her my dad's number. I was half expecting my dad to scold me or tell me, just like my stepdad, that I was overreacting and that being alone in the hospital was no big deal. But as soon as my dad answered the phone and the nurse explained my situation to him, he was immediately concerned. He sounded more distressed than I had heard him in a long time and asked me if my mother had really gone on a trip without me. I explained the whole situation, telling him how Kevin had insisted it was okay to leave me because he didn't want the trip money to be wasted and how Mom had finally agreed to go. My dad was furious. As I told him everything, he was silent, but I could feel his anger growing. Then he told me that my mother had only mentioned having a minor fender bender, downplaying the whole situation. She hadn't said a word about my broken arm or my concussion, or that she and Kevin would leave me alone in the hospital. According to what she had told him, there was nothing to worry about, so he hadn't felt the need to contact me. Discovering that Mom had deliberately lied to Dad about my situation made me feel even more hurt and betrayed. My dad immediately assured me that he would come as soon as he could. He told me that he would drop everything and drive to the hospital to stay with me, no matter how long it took. For the first time since I had been admitted, I felt some relief. Knowing that my dad would come to be with me and that someone was finally taking my situation seriously gave me hope, and as I sat there waiting, I realized how much I needed that kind of support in my life. In just 2 hours, my dad arrived at the hospital, and seeing him walk through the door felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my chest. I started to cry as he hugged me and assured me that everything would be all right. He then immediately went to talk to my doctors, making sure he understood every detail of my injuries. I could see the relief on his face when he confirmed that, although my injuries were painful and serious, they were not life-threatening. My dad was very sorry for not having been there for me before and for not having questioned what my mom had told him. He told me he regretted having trusted that everything was okay without asking me directly, and you could tell he blamed himself for it. My dad's anger towards Kevin was evident. He was furious that my stepfather took my needs so lightly and then decided to go on a trip instead of making sure I was well looked after. The lack of consideration and care Kevin showed by leaving me alone in the hospital made it clear how little he cared. His actions spoke for themselves, showing that even though he was married to my mother, I was nothing but a nuisance to him. My dad tried to call my mom and Kevin, but neither of them answered his calls. This made him even more angry, and he promised over and over again that he would make them see how wrong it was to abandon me like that. For the next 2 nights, my dad didn't leave my side. He even asked for time off work to make sure I wasn't alone. He didn't leave my side for a moment until I was finally discharged, and even then he didn't think it was right for me to go back to Kevin's house, where I would be left alone with a babysitter until everyone returned. Instead, he insisted that I come and live with him, and I accepted. Once I had settled into my dad's house, he tried to talk to Mom again. She said she hadn't seen his previous calls because she was having a great time with Kevin and his children. Hearing this only increased his anger, and this time he didn't hold back. He told her clearly that her behavior was unacceptable, that abandoning me in the hospital was a serious act of negligence, and that he planned to take legal action to make her and Kevin accountable. He even mentioned taking her to court if necessary, warning that she could lose my custody, making it clear that he was willing to denounce both her and Kevin for what they did. Since then, my phone has been ringing nonstop with calls and messages from both Kevin and my mother. Instead of acknowledging what they did or apologizing, they have been sending message after message, blaming me for ruining their vacation by telling my dad about my situation. Kevin has even gone so far as to say that all I had to do was stay quiet and calm at the hospital and not make any trouble. According to them, everything would have been fine if I had just done what they wanted. Am I the bad guy for exposing my mom and stepdad for what they did? Update 1. After having time to reflect and talk to my dad, I realized that there have been many occasions over the years when Kevin and Mom have pushed me aside, and I just accepted it. I kept quiet hoping that things would improve, but they never did. It's hard to admit it, but I allowed them to push me aside when it suited them, and now, looking back, I can't believe I put up with it for so long. For example, Kevin constantly attacked my relationship with my dad. He always made negative comments about him, saying he was irresponsible or a loser compared to him. This was because Kevin thought my dad hadn't been a good husband to my mom, and that's why he thought he had the right to criticize him. Mom never said anything to him when he did it. Whenever I've had problems at home or tried to talk to my mom about them, Kevin always ignores my feelings, saying that I make a drama out of everything, or that I'm too sensitive for being a girl. He often says that's why he's so lucky to only have sons. Kevin always shows preference for his sons, even in the smallest everyday things. He doesn't hesitate to give them money for whatever they want, but every time I ask my mom for something, Kevin asks me 1,000 questions. He always says that I'm buying things I don't need and wasting money, even though it's not even his money. It's my dad's money, so I can spend it as I like. Even though we lived in the same house, we never spent time together as a family. Kevin and Mom would often make plans with their children and leave me out, saying they didn't want to bother me, or that they wanted to spend time together without me. This made me feel abandoned and unimportant. They would go out to dinner or do activities they enjoyed without thinking that I might want to participate. That's probably why I was so excited when they included me in the vacation, because they rarely included me in their plans. Kevin and Mom don't like to celebrate my birthdays either. They always tell me that as Kevin's children don't make a big fuss about their birthdays, I shouldn't expect much either. It's as if they think I don't deserve special attention just because it's not their custom. And when it comes to presents, I end up getting things I don't even like or use, as if they didn't care enough to make an effort to choose something I would really enjoy. Whenever I had problems at school, Kevin would say things like, "You're just lazy, that's your problem," or "Why do you bother with that stuff?" Instead of asking what was wrong or offering help, he would turn it into how it bothered him. My mom, on the other hand, would just stay quiet, offering no comfort or encouragement, even though she knew how much it affected me. Update 2. My dad did report my mom and my stepdad to Child Protective Services, CPS. It wasn't an easy decision, but he felt it was necessary to make sure what had happened wouldn't be ignored. He couldn't stand by and let them treat me like that, abandoning me in the hospital without a second thought. When Kevin and my mom returned home, they were contacted by CPS officials. They had to answer many questions explaining the situation, their actions, and their decision. I'm sure it was a wake-up call they weren't expecting, but the authorities agreed with my dad that leaving me alone in the hospital, especially after being injured, was unacceptable. They recognized that I had been neglected in a way that put my well-being at risk. Afterwards, my mom called me. She wasn't happy at all, and I could tell from her tone that she was angry with me. She told me that I had gotten her and Kevin into a lot of trouble by getting the CPS involved. I felt like she was blaming me for what happened, but I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. She warned me that the CPS would contact me to hear my side of the story. My mom then pressured me to lie to the authorities, telling me that if I didn't, they might take me away from her and I would lose my custody. I told her that I didn't feel comfortable lying to the authorities, and that maybe she should have thought about the consequences when she left me alone at the hospital that day. Mom then tried to manipulate me with guilt, saying that I had devoted years of my life to her, and that I needed to show her my loyalty this time. She made it sound like I was betraying her by being honest with the authorities, as if I were responsible for everything that happened. But what surprised me most was when she told me that lying would also protect Kevin and his children. She explained that the CPS investigation could cause problems for Kevin, especially with his ex-wife. His ex-wife could find out and use this against him. I realized that my mom seemed more concerned about my stepfather's and her own reputation than about what I had been through. Not once did she ask me how I was or if I had recovered. Meanwhile, she kept begging me to lie and protect her family. I couldn't take her selfishness anymore. I stood my ground and told her straight that I didn't care how this would affect her and Kevin, but that I wouldn't lie to the authorities. I told her that I would tell them exactly what had happened and that I wouldn't hide anything for anyone. If this meant trouble for her and Kevin, then so be it. They were the adults. They had made the mistake, so I wouldn't protect them from the consequences of their actions. My mom yelled at me some more and insulted me, but I didn't change my mind. Since then, even though I feel guilty, I think I'm doing the right thing. Update 3. It's been almost 2 weeks since my last update. I spoke to the authorities and told them the truth. For now, I'll stay with my dad. He's been looking for schools so I can live with him permanently. I have to say it feels good to be with him. Mom is still trying to make me feel guilty, but there's nothing more I can do for now. He received a warning from the CPS. It is clear that Mom neglected her responsibility towards me, and that could not be ignored. The CPS has asked her to make important changes, such as attending compulsory parenting classes and counseling, to work on her neglect issues and her relationship with me. Kevin was also investigated as he had shown a lack of respect and care towards me, especially during the hospital ordeal. The CPS made it clear that they would be watching the situation closely if and when I went to stay with him, and that any further neglect or abuse would have more serious consequences. Update 4. It's incredible that it's been almost 4 months since I've been living with Dad. I feel like I'm finally in a place where I don't have to constantly watch what I say or doubt my worth. Living with Dad has been a huge relief. He supports me, listens to me and, most importantly, respects my space and my decisions. It's been a total change from what I was experiencing before. I feel listened to here. I can talk about my day, my problems, my dreams, and he really takes an interest. I've been able to focus more on school and my mental health, and I feel like I'm finally getting back to being myself. I've also made some amazing new friends at school and really enjoy spending time with them. In fact, last month, for the first time in a long time, I was able to have a proper birthday celebration. I invited all my friends over and we had a pizza party while watching romantic movies. It was the kind of birthday I had always wanted but never had when I lived with my mom and Kevin. As for Mom, things are still difficult. She has been trying to contact me more often lately, sending me messages about how sorry she is and how much she misses me. Part of me feels guilty for keeping my distance, but then I remember everything that happened to get to this point. I have made it clear to her that I am not yet ready to return, and although she tries to get closer, I have set limits for myself. Her actions hurt me, and she needs to accept full responsibility for them. As for Kevin, he has not apologized or accepted any responsibility for his actions. Honestly, I'm not surprised. He has never shown any real concern for me or my well-being. The way he treated me, especially when I was in the hospital, is something I will never forget. Whether or not he ever changes, I no longer care. I'm not waiting around to find out. I have learned to trust myself and the people who truly care about me, and that is enough.